everyone, and welcome to One Great History, a podcast all about the great and not so great parts of Winnipeg history. I'm one of your hosts, Sabrina.
And I'm Alex.
And we're joined, as always, by our producer, Nick.
Hello.
And today we're going to be talking about Winnipeg Beach.
Yes.
But before we get too into that, we actually got a letter from a listener who may not be a relative of mine.
We have listeners who aren't related to us.
Maybe. We've never seen them, so we can't be sure. So this relates back to our first episode when Alex was talking about not knowing what dainties are called in other places. And my aunt very nicely sent an anecdote about her friend's time in Arizona. So one of her friends was a teacher, and they were having a Christmas potluck for the staff, and her friend wrote down that she was going to bring in dainties as a treat, and apparently it caused a bit of a stir because no one knew what dainties were.
Right.
And they were worried she was going to bring in women's underwear.
I mean, like, I wouldn't think of it because I know what dainties are, but having heard it, I do get it.
I can imagine that being a bit of a kerfuffle at, like, a school fundraiser.
Yeah. Although, why would that be the assumption?
I don't know. I'm not sure how long it took to clear things up either, but
yeah.
Nice to know definitively dainties are not a thing in the States, at least.
The exciting update in my life this week is that my neighbor, who has horrifying silver mannequins that stare into my apartment, has put Santa hats on them.
Oh, so they're festive and scary.
They're festive and scary, that's right. And I wish they'd stop looking at me.
I forgot you had this horrifying mannequin situation.
It's an ongoing issue. For a while, he was bringing them, like, closer to the edge of the balcony every day, and didn't like it.
Do you think he's doing this to you?
Unclear. Does he think I enjoy the mannequins? Like,
is it for someone else in your apartment complex that he's doing this
Is this supposed
for?
to be like a show? Am I supposed to like this? I don't know, but I don't. At nighttime, it's really scary.
That's fair.
But yeah, in any case,
at least the topic today is less frightening than spooky balcony mannequins.
I tend to like the kind of, like, horrible histories, as we know.
Yeah.
And this week is actually pretty light, which is nice. I mean, like, within the context of the kind of colonial horribleness of Canadian
Everything,
history.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about Winnipeg Beach. When you were a kid, I don't know, did you used to, like, go to the lake? Was that a thing for...
No, I think
we should specify that I grew up in Winnipeg and you grew up in a small town.
Yeah, I grew up in Morris.
Yeah.
Which is, like, 40 minutes south of Winnipeg, so going to the lake was a bit of a trip for my family. We went to St. Malo.
Okay.
Pretty frequently, but that was to St. Malo. It wasn't really a lake.
Right. And I feel like for kind of, like, middle-class city kids, going to the lake is, like, a big part of every summer. Mm-hmm. Where you, like... The assumption is that you're going to spend part of the summer at, you know, maybe in the White Shell or somewhere like that, at, like, a rented cabin or in a tent or something like that.
Yeah, we used to spend summers for, like, a week maybe in St. Malo, but then my sister was born and she was the worst toddler in the world. So we couldn't do that anymore because she would always run away.
Oh, no. But yeah, I feel like some people almost, like, center part of their identity around going to the lake.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, even, like, cabin culture.
Yes, totally, cabin culture. And part of that is based around the reason that Winnipeg Beach was founded, which is that the idea that kind of getting out into nature is good for you. Mm-hmm. So we're going to rewind kind of 120 years here to around 1900. Winnipeg is growing, of course. Cities all over are growing. And there's this growing idea that being in the city is unhealthy, which isn't totally wrong.
Well, especially when you think about, like, the air pollution from factories.
Yes, so there weren't, environmental regulations didn't really exist at this time. So it's not totally wrong that being in the city was not necessarily the healthiest. Of course, also there's, various pandemics and such. Mm-hmm. And so people are looking for ways to escape it. So that's kind of the idea behind places like Winnipeg Beach. But before we get into the actual building of the resort there and the fun stuff, I do just want to be clear about one thing, which is that a number of historians seem to talk about the creation of the resort at Winnipeg Beach as if it's the creation or discovery of the beach itself.
Oh.
The beach is already there.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I didn't think Winnipeg Beach was man-made.
No, it's not. And it's only like a discovery in as much as CP Rail, who established the resort, and most Winnipeggers had not been there.
Okay, yeah.
So Lake Winnipeg, like just about any other North American waterway, was super important to those communities who have lived here for thousands of years before European settlement. Mm-hmm. Obviously, water's essential to life. We like to drink it and, fish in it and bathe in it and growing rice and all that kind of good stuff. Lake Winnipeg, along with other waterways, was also a really important trade network, both before and during the fur trade.
Yeah.
So I do just want to give a little bit of context for why a place like Winnipeg Beach can be created. And that context is going to be basically the cliff notes of Treaty 5.
Okay.
So in 1875, Treaty 5 is negotiated, and treaty history is a whole big thing.
Yes.
I'm not an expert. This is super nuanced. Go read more books on it.
Please don't just listen to us on this.
No, please don't. But the context I want to give is basically it's negotiated in a time of crisis for First Nations. Mm-hmm. So Treaty 5 is the treaty negotiated in this area around Lake Winnipeg. The fur trade had dwindled. There was an acute food crisis. There was also the beginnings of a smallpox epidemic. Mm-hmm. So First Nations were interested in coming to some kind of agreement. And the agreement they came to was that the government would provide access to certain resources and supports, while the government in exchange would have use of land and natural resources.
Okay.
Apart from the land established for reserves. So that's what kind of makes land like Winnipeg Beach available for this kind of thing. The other thing is that shortly after the treaty is signed, First Nations are actually quarantined on reserves as a result of that smallpox epidemic. And then, of course, later on, there's the pass system, which also keeps First Nations on reserves. So,
and I'm going to hazard a guess that the government didn't always deliver the food and resources that were promised.
No, I mean, that's its whole own topic, obviously. I mean, treaty promises being broken is not something I can cover in 30 seconds for sure. But essentially what that means is that the people who would have been there previously are now on reserves for the most part. Which
and hey,
sort of
free beach.
Free beach, exactly. That we can say we discovered. So in 1901, William White, who's assistant to the CP Rail president, takes a boat along the shore of Lake Winnipeg, and he finds this nice beach, which he promptly names Winnipeg Beach.
Okay.
Of course. And so at this point, the concept of a seaside resort is at like an all-time high. So this is why CP Rail is looking into this. This idea that, the city is unhealthy, that to get better and to be well, you should spend some time out in the wilderness.
I feel like that was a big thing when you look at like history of illness. Also, if you're suffering from like consumption, it's go get the good country air. So
yeah,
like in London, you'd be sort of sent out of the main city area.
Yeah, absolutely. So that happened here as well. During the polio epidemics, especially, people were sent out to Winnipeg Beach. Although
the focus on fresh air for sure.
Yeah, and on like the mineral water being good for you, and it's all this kind of stuff. Although the idea of like wilderness is itself kind of a colonial concept. There's some really interesting articles about this that I'll put in the source notes, but the kind of cliff notes is that basically there are very, very few places in the world where nature has actually been untouched by humans. Mm-hmm. So the wilderness here in what we now call Canada that appears to be sort of untouched or appeared to be had in reality been shaped through things like controlled burns, land clearing, sowing of rice in certain waterways and not others, farms. And so absolutely, it's not just kind of untouched wilderness in that way, but it's not the noisy, smelly city.
Yeah.
So that much, at least, they're right about, and there is something nice about that. To avoid the pandemics as well. I'm sure people right now who are like living out in a cabin in the woods are feeling a lot safer than I am living in downtown Winnipeg.
Yeah, I think that's probably true.
So that's the kind of bigger context, but also more specifically, the Canadian Northern Railway had already partially built lines to beaches.
Oh.
So they've got direct competition.
Okay.
And that's really what they're trying to undercut here.
Okay.
So they decide that Winnipeg Beach is going to be the spot for this resort, and they're going to build rail lines out there. Later in 1901, a Tribune reporter takes a carriage out to Winnipeg Beach to see what it's about. Took 16 hours.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So obviously that's not the way to get there. Yeah. But by train, they actually managed to get that down to about 75 minutes.
Much better.
Much better.
16 hours is a long time.
It is, and probably the beach is not worth that.
No.
Winnipeg Beach is nice, but it's
I could drive to Saskatoon. in that amount of time.
Yeah, I mean, you're not taking a carriage, presumably.
No, I don't think so.
So in 1902, the rail line itself is built. Various kind of notable Winnipeggers, as well as media representatives, are invited. And it quickly becomes pretty popular. So by 1906, there's already 13 trains a day on holiday weekends.
Oh, wow.
Except for Sundays.
Of course.
So trains didn't run on Sundays, so there was actually a last chance train at 10:30 on Saturday. So if you didn't get that, you're basically stuck, whether you're stuck at the beach or stuck at home.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Things don't run on Sundays. And so many trains are running. In 1906, 2 trains actually collided.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so I don't think anyone was hurt especially, but 3,000 people were stranded at Winnipeg Beach. And they didn't get home until 5 a.m.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so apparently it was a 7-mile walk from the accident to the nearest telegraph.
Oh, my God. That's awful.
Yeah, and so that just kind of underlines the fact that the train was really the only way to get there for several years, until 1915. And some people liked that, like the time on the train, they talk about kind of like built the excitement of like, hey, you're going out to the beach, and that's super fun, right? 1913 was when the first car went out to Winnipeg Beach.
Very exciting.
Apparently, according to one history, it took most of the day to make the trip from Winnipeg by way of Stony Mountain, Stonewall, and so on, and finally landed in Winnipeg Beach with broken springs, blowouts, and an empty gas tank.
Yeah, I guess the roads probably weren't paved.
No, there weren't. Basically, it was just trails. Apparently, it also ran over the police chief's dog.
Oh.
Okay, don't get too sad, though. Apparently, that story is probably not true. There's a...
Why would someone make that up, though?
I don't know. I don't know why someone would make that up, but that's
Did someone hate the police chief?
That's kind of the anecdote about that, but I don't think there's any real evidence that that happened. And there's a story about the police chief kind of chasing after the car that ran over his dog. So hopefully that didn't happen.
We'll never know.
We'll never know. Yeah, so prior to the road being built, also in 1912, 50 people were left at the beach after the last train left by accident, and they wanted to walk home.
Oh, no.
Yeah, but they managed to be convinced not to by being told that they would be eaten by bears. So instead, they ended up having to charter a ship, which I'm sure none of them were too happy about. That was basically the only other way to get there at that point. Sometimes people who missed the Moonlight Express, which was one of the late trains, would have to either sleep just like on a park bench or like in the picnic pavilion. So 1915 is when the first road is built.
Okay.
But even after that, like the train is a big part of the culture at Winnipeg Beach, right? That's a big part of the excitement is you spend an hour on the train and you get there and everyone gets there at once, right? Because you're all on this big train. And so it's this big crowd that gets into town and goes off to amuse themselves. But Winnipeg Beach began very differently than what it turned into. Initially, it was advertised really to upper class families.
Okay.
Which makes sense if we think about like what a seaside resort is like in a place like England, right?
Yeah.
You know, this is a fancy place where you send your ill loved ones to or whatever.
Yeah.
Part of that, though, was what was known as the Daddy's Train.
I'm sorry?
The Daddy's Train?
Okay.
So the Daddy's Train left at 5:20 p.m. And the advertising here, the marketing was based around the idea that the father of a family would work in Winnipeg and commute out to the beach and back, whereas his family would be kind of stationed in a cabin out of the beach.
Yeah.
But the round trip fare was $1.20, which most laborers at this point were only making about 20 cents an hour.
Okay, so that's, a lot of money.
Yeah, so really this was only the wealthy who would have been able to afford that.
Only the rich can take the daddy train.
Only the rich take the Daddy's Train. And, like, in reality, not even that. Like, most families who did do that, like, the dad would stay in town during the week and then kind of commute out for the weekends. Yeah. Which I think is still a thing that people do with, like, the lake. I remember when I was a kid going out we used to go to West Talk Lake, and, like, my dad would work during the week and then on the weekends drive out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hard to do now that everyone works.
Be a little trickier.
Yeah. It was also advertised to picnicking groups. So picnics were a big thing in the first half of the 20th century. So places like workplaces and churches and stuff would hold these big picnics. These were super popular. They're in the paper all the time. And for those coming for shorter stays, for maybe a couple of days, who didn't want to rent a cabin, the Empress Hotel was built.
Oh, all right.
So I don't know if you've heard of the Empress Hotel.
Vaguely?
Yeah, so it was pretty fancy. Again, this is part of the kind of marketing to the upper class. It had tennis courts and bowling greens.
Oh, wow.
Baths on every floor, although not in every room. But
okay.
still advertised as like being pretty fancy. An orchestra, a yacht for guest use.
Just one yacht?
I guess. I don't know how you bargain over who gets to use that. And it was also lighted by electricity.
Ooh, very fancy.
Yes, which in the early 1900s is pretty fancy.
Yeah.
And some upper class women would come and stay at the Empress because their maids wouldn't come with them to the beach.
Why would the maids not go to the beach?
Well, so I guess if you have a maid who's like not a live-in maid, right, who wants to go home at the end of each
that
day,
makes sense, yeah.
she's not going to really want to go and spend the entire summer living with
With you
you and
on the
waiting on.
beach.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair.
Unfortunately, though, the Empress Hotel burned down in 1935.
Okay.
And so that's part of Winnipeg Beach becoming decidedly less upper class.
Okay,
So
that
going
makes sense.
into the 20s and 30s and then into the 40s, 50s, and 60s, it definitely becomes more of a working class area. And it becomes something else, which is a place for people to mingle, in particular, men and women.
So like a dating hotspot.
Yes, it was like the dating hotspot, for sure.
That's cute.
It is cute. The advertising kind of shifted to focus on young men and women, and it was just like a place where people felt freer, right? Like you were saying, like that cabin culture, right? Like everyone knows that when you go out to the lake, you kind of feel a little more relaxed out there.
You kick back. You
you kick
relax.
back. You're sleeping in, you're not working. It's hot and you're on the beach, so you're wearing less clothes. Like
This all sounds like a nightmare to me. I hate being warm.
Oh. Well, then you'd probably have hated living in, like, the early 20th century in
absolutely.
general before air conditioning existed. Like, but the beach is there.
Yeah.
You can go swimming.
Just live in the water for the rest of
Yeah,
my
there
life.
you go. So it was a place where people felt freer, which I think made it kind of a nice dating spot. But in the late 1800s and early 1900s, the way you met potential mates was through what was called calling, or kind of a courting system.
Right, yes.
Yeah. So calling is essentially when a young man usually would go to the home of a young woman's parents, essentially, and call upon her. Right? And this allows it all to be very proper in the kind of Victorian, Edwardian way where, you know, the parents are there and you have nice little chit-chats and sort of get their approval, right? And so that definitely happened at Winnipeg Beach. There were like nice cabins that were built pretty much right away with like parlors and verandas where people socialized. And social columns also listed eligible men and women who were visiting the beach.
Oh.
Yes, you might actually plan your trip right around that.
Ooh.
You'd be like,
One of the Ashdown kids is going.
Yeah, I'm going to take the train out this weekend and go call on them, you know?
Yeah, okay.
And the nice thing about Winnipeg Beach for that was that there were also kind of quiet places to go after that official bit.
Oh.
Right? So after you've got the parents' approval and you're kind of hanging out, you can go for a nice walk along the beach.
Okay, but not like a weird go like make out in the woods kind of
Well,
quiet place.
maybe
Okay.
that also. Definitely later.
Okay.
It's that. Like, I think initially it's more just like that it's a novelty to spend time alone.
Yeah,
With
that's
a
fair.
member of the opposite sex. And in a quiet place, you know, like in Winnipeg, it was pretty busy around.
Mm-hmm.
And I think after a while, the shift is partly like, why bother with that first bit? Right?
Yeah.
Like, as morals change, as we're kind of less set on getting our parents' approval for everyone we date, why bother with the calling when we can just go to the nice second bit where we take a nice walk?
Yeah.
And the kind of, I think, in-between part between that and, like, dating, as we'd be more familiar with it, were house parties. So
Okay.
there were a lot of house parties out at Winnipeg Beach. Not like ragers, you know? Like, like, you know, fancy ones.
Classy affairs that don't
Classy
involve
affairs.
like red Solo cups.
Yes, no red Solo cups.
There weren't any keggers.
No one's doing a keg stand.
Even then, actually, I'll talk about it more later, but drinking was really not a big part of this culture.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So fancier cabins would often have like large living rooms, which even opened out onto verandas. So you could have like a fair number of people over.
Fancy.
So yeah, so if you had, you know, a young eligible daughter, you might invite over some men who you thought might be suitable.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know. Dating was weird. It still is. However we do it is weird, right?
Yeah. The thought of having, like, my parents specifically invite a bunch of men over to my house to meet me is maybe the weird part.
Didn't that happen on the Gilmore Girls?
It might have. I've never seen the Gilmore Girls.
Am I, like, it's weird. There's two. Have you seen the Gilmore Girls, Alex?
Like 10 years ago.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there's
more.
an episode where they want, like, Rory, the lead Gilmore Girl, is dating a townie boy, and her grandparents don't like that, so they invite over a bunch of, like, eligible young, like, Harvard and Yale men.
Oh.
And,
So they were partaking in a grand old tradition.
Yes.
The other thing that shifts is it is becoming more acceptable for women to go out in public.
Yeah, I guess you're right.
Which I'm very grateful for. I'm glad I'm not just stuck at home all day. But I mean, that's true. Women were expected generally, especially if they were like, you know, not working, to stay home,
Yeah.
especially kind of upper class women. So yeah, people begin to turn to kind of dating rather than this kind of calling and courting system. And as we'll see after World War I, there's some pretty fun stuff to do at Winnipeg Beach. Stuff that actually didn't even exist in Winnipeg yet,
Oh.
which is pretty cool.
Okay. Like what?
So swimming was actually not a huge part of it. I'll get into that in a second. But initially there's the beach, a picnic area, and a dance pavilion. So
Okay.
that doesn't sound super exciting yet. That's kind of before World War I. But afterwards, in 1919, first of all, a wooden roller coaster is completed.
Ooh.
Yeah, so here's a quote about it. "It was a wooden structure. It moved. You know, when you were going around corners, the whole structure moved."
Oh, that sounds really safe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds horrifying, but people loved it apparently.
I love it when I go on a roller coaster and the whole thing moves.
Yeah, there was one oral history where they're saying that like some people would come down there and literally ride it for hours. Like
my-
virtually handcuff themselves to it and just ride it nonstop.
Oh my God.
Like tickets were cheap. And at 6 p.m. each night, a calliope would play, announcing that the rides were open.
Okay.
So do you know what a calliope is?
No,
it's
I don't.
kind of like a big, it's almost like an organ of sorts.
Okay.
Yeah. It's hard to describe, but it plays like pipe music, essentially.
Okay.
So there were all kinds of like carnival style games, you know, like the ones you go and you try and win a stuffed animal
Yeah.
and you lose every time because they're rigged.
Yeah.
And rides as well. So there was a merry-go-round, there were bumper cars, planes, and a roller coaster, like I mentioned. And young men would pay for their girlfriends to kind of go on these rides.
Nice.
So that was a big part of the dating. Another big part of it was actually just like promenading up and down the boardwalk.
Yeah, all right.
So the boardwalk was built, and I kind of like, this isn't totally unfamiliar to me thinking of like when I was a teenager, like just kind of like walking around trying to catch attention, right?
Yeah.
And I should say this is like primarily heterosexual dating that I'm talking about, of course. Though we do know from oral histories that some same-sex couples did sometimes find ways to get together. And sometimes what facilitated that is the fact that like before you're in kind of the dating zone, you're usually kind of coming up in groups of like just men or just women.
Well, with your friends.
Yeah, with your friends, exactly. And like at the end of the night, you'd mostly be going back to a place to stay with your friends again. And yeah, so people at this point who want a nature retreat, which is what Winnipeg Beach had started out as, are like, there's a roller coaster and a calliope and all these young people
Natural wonders.
Yeah. So it really stops being that. And from especially like the 30s and 40s onward, there was a road built to the White Shell, so people would usually go there instead. And like cars were more available as well.
Yeah.
Like I said, swimming was not a big part of it actually, which is kind of interesting.
I guess that makes sense knowing that like bathing suits wouldn't have been.
That's a big part of it. So like children swam because children can kind of be undressed and it's not really a big deal. But
men
adults,
and women undressed.
yes.
Scandalous.
So back in like the 19th century, men and women usually swam separately and nude.
Okay.
Yeah.
That seems hard to facilitate on a public beach.
Yes, it is. So that was definitely passed by the time that like Winnipeg Beach is getting up and running. Actually, in 1912, a young man is fined for skinny dipping.
Yeah, fair enough.
It does still happen, but now it's less like, this is how you're supposed to swim, and now it's...
Well, you're breaking the rules.
Now it's you're breaking the rules, and it's like a fun thing.
Yeah.
CPR actually eventually strings lights along the beach to stop people from doing exactly that. I mean,
right.
I think they pitch it as like, there's lights along the beach now for nice walks, but like...
But secretly, it's so people will stop swimming naked.
Stop swimming naked. Yeah, I'd say like in general, in the first half of the 1900s, there's this shift from like men and women socializing only separately to socializing together. And so that changes how you do it, right?
Yeah.
And how you can dress while you're doing it. And swimsuits actually between the late 1900s and the late 1800s and the 1930s don't change a lot.
Oh, wow.
Like, they're kind of horrifying, right? Like, women are basically wearing an entire outfit.
Yeah.
Men's, like, get a little less constricting.
Well, they're like unitards.
Yeah, but women are wearing, like, stockings and
Yeah.
all kinds of things. Basically an entire kind of dress.
Yeah. It's a whole new outfit to put on.
Yeah, so they do slowly become to get more practical, especially because women start to engage in, like, swimming competitions at this point. That's a big part of it, is that it's hard to swim fast if you're wearing just, like, clothes.
Yeah. A skirt would really slow you down.
Yes, but you can't not have a skirt, even when things loosen up a little.
Of course. I'm so sorry for even suggesting that.
Less than 5 inches of skirt was forbidden. Apparently some beaches, not specifically Winnipeg Beach, but between the 20s and 40s, some beaches had like censors who they employed who would go around and measure women's skirts.
What a bizarre job.
The funny thing about that is that seems way more improper to me than a woman not wearing a skirt is for a man to come up to her and like start measuring her clothing.
And then scolding her for getting it wrong.
Yeah. But at Winnipeg Beach, at least like by the 1930s, most police officers out there apparently didn't care that much. As long as you were on the beach, though.
Ah.
If you leave the beach in your swimsuit, that's another matter. Not allowed. In the 1930s, a girl was taken off of Main Street for being in her bathing suit.
Oh my god.
Yeah. And in 1943, they actually passed a law in Winnipeg Beach that anyone over the age of 12 had to be clad from shoulder to knees once off the beach, or they would be fined $25.
Oh, wow. That's a lot of money.
For 1943, that's a lot of money.
Yeah. So were there changing rooms on the beach then?
There were. Some beaches, I haven't seen photos of these at Winnipeg Beach, but I wouldn't be surprised if they had them. Some beaches had what were called changing machines. Have you seen these?
I don't think I have.
They're almost like a kind of square tent with like wheels on it that can be like almost rolled out into the water, so you can change in it and then sort of go straight into the water without having the kind of indecent bit of even being on land in your swimsuit.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, but they're basically little like solitary changing rooms. They're just on the beach. Sometimes you can roll them into the water. But yeah, definitely there were changing rooms as well. Yeah, and so swimming was not kind of a huge part of the dating culture, although that was a big thing of like what families were doing, and that would get, I think, bigger over time, especially as it gets more suitable to be in a swimsuit.
Yeah.
Actually, I do still find that when I go to the beach, that like on the beach I'm fine, but once I go into like the town, even at Winnipeg Beach specifically, it's kind of like, ooh, I should put on a shirt, right?
I often wear my bathing suit top as a top if I'm at the beach.
Yeah. I don't know. I do feel like I should like stick on like a pair of shorts or something, you know?
I might wear shorts, but that's more of a like my legs rub together. It's a different issue.
It's a different issue, but also fair.
But yeah, I can get the like my bathing suit top is pretty like full coverage anyway. I can see if you're in like a skinny or like a bikini top, it might be nicer to cover up.
Yeah, it's a funny idea though that like when I'm near the water, I
can be undressed.
I can be undressed, but once I'm away from it, I must wear clothing.
The further away, the more covered I must be.
Yeah, and so apparently that was like enshrined in law. That's
so weird.
So other stuff, there were little moving picture machines, which had horses and also scantily clad ladies.
Oh, so like a peep show.
Yeah.
Great.
And I think when they say moving picture machines, I think what they're talking about is like zoetropes.
Oh,
so
yeah.
If any of our listeners have been to the Manitoba Museum Science Center, they'll have seen a zoetrope. It's basically like a metal cylinder with slits cut into it. And as you spin it, the pictures inside, as you look through the slit, seem to move. So I think that's what they're talking about.
It might be.
Yeah. But I'm not sure. It could be a different kind of moving picture machine. And the big one is that in 1924, a huge dance hall is built.
Very exciting.
So it's 14,000 square feet.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
That's so huge is not an exaggeration.
No, it actually legitimately is huge. And this replaces the former dance pavilion, which had been there and was kind of smaller. It's apparently this is a classic Winnipeg line here, largest in Western Canada.
Yeah, not in all of Canada, but in the West.
In Western Canada, yes. So, but like the important thing there is it's bigger than anything in Winnipeg by far.
Yeah, that's right.
And the dance hall could see 40,000 people on a busy weekend.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So actually, on July 1st weekend in 1920, we know, for instance, that 15,000 people purchased train tickets, and that children and people who lived nearby didn't need them. So it was probably as much as twice that weekend,
wow.
at least. So 30,000 people. That was 1/10 of all the people in Winnipeg at that time.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's super popular, and the dance hall especially is the place to be. And it's kind of suitable to what dating becomes.
Oh.
Because I think nowadays when people are dating, it's often like you find one guy or one gal and you date them for a while, right? Mm-hmm. Until something happens and you stop dating them. Or you really like them and you get married or whatever. But prior to, I'd say, I don't know when that shifted, but generally, like, in decades past, it was a lot more casual, I think, right? You'd generally be dating more than one person at once until you got engaged or married. And so people would pay in the dance hall by set. So that was 2 or 3 quick songs, so it'd be, like, 2 or 3 minutes, basically. And you'd buy, like, tickets, and this was kind of an in for a young man to ask a young lady to dance. He'd say, oh, I've got this ticket, would you like to dance this set with me? So you'd change partners throughout the evening. It's actually seen as rude if you didn't.
Oh, interesting.
So, like, if you danced with the same guy the whole evening, that was, like, kind of like,
Oh, interesting.
yeah, like, not allowed.
This is going to be a nerdy comparison, but is it not kind of like dance cards and like sort of Jane Austen era like Regency balls? Because you would have dance cards you could check off.
Oh, yeah, I'd say it would be, pretty similar to that,
Like a less
actually.
formal process, but...
Yes, for sure less formal, and there would be, like, way more people there to kind of choose from. But yeah, pretty similar to that, where I think you're expected to kind of,
Well, mingle, right?
mingle, and yeah, it's just polite to kind of give different people your attention. But often you do, like, your first and last dance with, like, the guy you were really keen on. If you were engaged, it was okay to dance just with the one guy.
Okay, I'm
But
glad
it's funny,
there's a rule for that.
yeah. Although it's funny that, like, even, like, there's histories even of, like, married women going and, like, doing dances with different men and stuff. Like, it wasn't seen as all that improper or all that kind of, like, romantic to dance with someone.
Whereas I guess now, if you think of, like, going to a wedding and you slow dance with someone that's not, like, your partner, that's very weird.
For sure. Yeah, so I think it was a lot more casual in that sense. The other important thing is that this was a place where women felt safe to socialize in that way, which is pretty cool, actually. So partly it was because there were lots of people there, and also because women tended to go in groups. So you'd go with a group of your girlfriends, there's tons of people there, so you kind of felt safe to, mingle and meet different guys and meet different girls and whatever. It was also seen as improper to go alone.
Okay, so you had to go with friends.
You kind of had to go with friends. If you didn't, you might be seen as a prostitute.
Oh!
So, yeah.
Was that like a thing that actually happened, or was that a needless concern?
I suspect it was a needless concern.
It just seems like if you are a sex worker, there's probably an easier place to go than a busy Winnipeg Beach dance hall.
I would think so. I mean,
That's weird.
It's just,
all right.
Yeah. And really there was nothing like this in the city, right? There wasn't a place where you could go and mingle with so many different types of people who you might not get to meet otherwise. And there was the forested area outside.
Perfect.
To go make out. You meet the guy you like, you have a fun dance with him, and then you go outside into the forest,
Excellent. That's safe.
Yes. And the other thing is, like, if things went really well, maybe at the end of the night, you could go to one of the nearby, like, hotels or rooming houses.
Oh, yeah.
But...
Oh, there's rules.
There's rules. Yeah, this is the thing with dating in any time and place, right? Is there's so many of these, like, moralistic rules, right? No matter what time we're talking about. And they're, like, so specific to time periods. But in this case, of course, you could not rent a hotel room unless you were married.
Right.
So you would have to sign a thing saying that you were married.
Okay.
But generally, like, often they didn't check.
Yeah.
So you could just sort of sign this thing and then, you know.
You could just lie.
Yeah, you could just lie. I think generally people weren't checking that hard. And like I said, dating generally didn't mean drinking at this time, which is kind of interesting. Because nowadays, I think, you know, often what a date is like, let's go to a pub, let's go to a bar, get a couple of drinks and talk. But, which is not to say that people didn't drink.
Yeah.
Like that they didn't drink at all. Young men especially did sneak drinks into the dance hall. There are stories like they'd sell soda in the dance hall, so you could like bring your flask with rum in it and then,
Yeah.
you know, get the Coke
I know people that still do that at socials to save money.
Oh, gee, drinks are so cheap at socials.
Yeah, but you've met our friends.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's kind of how drinking was happening, but women especially were discouraged from drinking, especially publicly, and especially in mixed company.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
so weird that women had to follow that rule and men didn't.
It's very weird, yeah, that women were expected to remain sober, and like from accounts, I think they generally did.
Oh, wow.
It sounds like it was mainly young men doing the kind of drinking. I mean, I'm sure young women probably when they were in their own friend groups were going home and drinking, but yeah.
They were being sneakier about it than men, if nothing else.
Yeah, and so for a long time, the only place to go drink at Winnipeg Beach was a beer parlor, which was for men only.
Right, yeah.
And there were concerns about even that, about men behaving inappropriately, and there were like a lot of efforts to stop drinking altogether. Of course, there was a period of prohibition in Manitoba, which I always like to say we voted for. So
Very keen on the idea for a bit there.
yeah, fun, weird fact. And even after Prohibition, drinking was still pretty closely policed.
Yeah.
So it was like small little tables. You weren't allowed to carry your drinks around.
Yeah, there were some pretty strict rules about what you could and could not do with liquor until like the
Yes.
1970s even.
Yeah. And so we should definitely do an episode about that at some point. But at Winnipeg Beach, the way this plays out is that there's just this beer parlor for men, which is, it sounds like not a super happening place because you just got to sit at your little table and there's no bar and you can't move
Just
around.
hang out with your friends.
Just
and
hang out with
sit.
your friends. I mean, that could be nice. Although apparently women were sometimes glad to get rid of them for a while.
Wow, what a polite way of saying that.
Yeah. But fun fact, in 1928, so this is a few years after Prohibition, a women's only beer parlor opened.
Ooh,
It
that's
was
exciting.
the only one in Manitoba.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it was very exciting for a few hours. Until it was shut down for not having the correct license.
Wow, so that was really short-lived.
Very, very short-lived. And apparently they didn't try again. So I have to feel like there
was getting a license too hard?
Well, I have to imagine that there must be something more to that story. Like, right, that they were told that they, you know, would not be allowed no matter what.
Yeah.
Because otherwise I can't imagine why you wouldn't go through the application process and
Try again.
try and get the license, right? Especially after putting in the effort to kind of create
We'll
it.
make it and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you had been out at the beach with your friends during the day, the way you'd generally get home would be the Moonlight Express. So this would be the kind of last train of the day that would take you home in the evening. Called the Moonlight Express, obviously, because it would, you know, be dark as you came home. A Moonlight Express could hold about 1,600 people. And this was a big part of the dating culture, because you'd often go up to the beach in your groups of, like, you know, just men or just women. Separately, you know, you'd tell your mom, like, oh yeah, I'm going up with my girlfriends to the beach, and then of course you'd meet guys out there, but often on the way back people were kind of coupled up.
Yeah.
Also, young people would try to turn the lights off on the Moonlight Express all the time. This is like a repeat issue. It's in the Tribune quite a lot.
Okay.
There were CPR officials on board who were trying to, like, ensure good behavior, but it was often kind of like a tug of war between the two of them, where, like, young men especially would be trying to turn off the lights over and over again. They'd be turning them back on. And usually, eventually, the train workers would just give up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Although in 1946, 2 young men were actually fined for turning off the lights on the train. I guess they got fed up. And again, this was like an opportunity to make out, right?
Yeah.
Or just like sit quietly with your new beau.
Yeah. Or to annoy some poor train official.
Or to, I mean, honestly, that might be the most fun part of it, right? It's just annoying the
the poor employee who just has to supervise these idiot
and like
teens.
relight the lights over and over again.
Yeah.
I don't even know if they were electric lights at that point.
Oh no, so it might have been much harder.
Yeah, be super annoying. Oh man, I know I'm getting old when I like relate to the train workers having to turn on the lights and not the like the young couples turning them
I just
out.
want to have fun.
Yeah. Like, it's not safe. Keep the lights on. So kind of unrelated to dating, one of the other really neat things about Winnipeg Beach is that as opposed to other places like Victoria Beach or Grand Beach, the CPR really wanted as many people to come as possible, right? They're trying to make money, and the way they make money is train tickets, people coming out. So in contrast, places like Victoria Beach, which I'd say is still pretty fancy. Have you been to Victoria Beach?
I have not, but I've heard of it.
It's nice. Yeah. But it advertised exclusivity. So there was less kind of entertainment stuff there. And entry was controlled. So anyone can go to Winnipeg Beach, right? As long as you can afford the train fare.
Yeah.
No one's going to stop you from going. Of course, that does prevent some people who can't afford the train fare, but it wasn't that expensive. And so it becomes geared more towards the working class. So, of course, there are plenty of, like, upper-class visitors as well. The other thing is that it didn't exclude people of different ethnic or religious or cultural backgrounds.
Oh.
Which places like Victoria Beach did.
I guess that comes with exclusivity.
That's what exclusivity means. Let's be real. The Boardwalk and the beach especially were a place where people of different classes and backgrounds mingled in a way that didn't often happen in Winnipeg, actually.
Oh, interesting.
Right? Like, Winnipeg, I kind of hesitate to use this word, but in some ways was kind of ghettoized. Right?
Yeah.
Like, or people were kind of almost like sanctioned off, cordoned off in their areas of, you know, their particular cultural background. And so, you know, wouldn't necessarily be mixing with people of different ethnic or class backgrounds. But anyone can go to the beach. And so that was happening there. And, you know, the dance hall as well, right? In contrast, at Sandy Hook, which is another nearby beach and resort, they advertised desirable neighbors only.
Oh, gross.
And said, it gets worse.
Oh, no.
Your home in Sandy Hook is protected by restrictions that will permanently ensure its freedom from undesirable associations. This is the thing about Canadian history, is like, when we look at American history, because they had like Jim Crow laws, often it's very explicit.
Yeah.
The kind of, you know, just outright racism. In Canadian history, it's often these kind of things like that.
Well, it's veiled a little bit.
It's a little veiled, but it's really unveiled very quickly when anyone tries to push those boundaries.
Yeah. Because I'm assuming by undesirables, they mean anything from like Black people to Jewish people trying to go to their beach.
Yeah. Jewish people especially. I mean, I imagine it would include Black people as well, but there were simply fewer Black people than Jewish people in Winnipeg at this point. So in 1943, a Jewish family tries to buy a cabin at Victoria Beach, and met with basically an uproar. A newspaper editorial in response to this said, "You have an obligation to your neighbors at Victoria Beach. Remember, you have an obligation to see to it that those unwanted people who have overrun beaches on the other side of Lake Winnipeg are not permitted to buy or rent here. Up until this year, we have been able to keep our beach free of them, maintaining a rule, unwritten but unanimously approved and observed for more than 25 years.
Ugh.
Yeah, gross.
So by the other beach, do they mean Winnipeg Beach?
I think they mean Winnipeg Beach. Yes, exactly. So what they mean is that Jewish families have been allowed to buy homes.
Yeah.
And go to the beach.
Overrun the area by existing.
By existing. How dare they? Now, that does kind of stop after a while, or I won't say stop, but it lessens for sure. In 1950, the Supreme Court of Canada actually outlaws discriminatory land covenants.
Oh.
Though I'm sure it doesn't stop those kind of unwritten rules.
Yeah.
And decades later, we do still see the remnants of that. So by the 1980s, cottage ownership at Winnipeg Beach was 44% Anglo-Saxon, and at Victoria Beach, 70%.
Oh, that's a huge difference.
That's a huge difference, and that's decades after these, you know, kind of unwritten rule policies have supposedly been taken out.
But you have to assume that in places like Victoria Beach, then the people that were alive when the policies were still in place were still living there and probably maybe wouldn't have been kind.
Yeah,
say new
I'm sure
neighbors?
even if that family had been allowed to buy that cabin, probably would not have been treated very nicely.
No.
Yeah. Yeah, and so Winnipeg Beach, conversely, also was a place where ethnic, religious, and working groups could also spend time together.
Yeah.
So they could go and mingle, but they could also spend time together via these picnics, especially. It was also possible to book a separate train car.
Oh.
So you could kind of take your church group or your, group with your synagogue out to the beach in a separate train car, have a nice day all together, and kind of form these ties.
Yeah.
And we haven't talked too much about people actually living at the beach, but of course, more and more people do begin to do that, live and work out there. And there is the creation of a Jewish community out at the beach.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, but despite the fact that I've just finished saying it was more open, they did generally keep to a particular area.
Oh.
The boundary of which was literally a place called Boundary Park.
Very on the nose, all right.
Yeah, a little on the nose there. And kids would actually have fist fights there in the 30s and 40s over, like, boundary lines.
Oh, Jesus.
I feel like kids had fist fights more often generally in the past. I don't know what's up with that.
Nothing else to do?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I feel like in the course of my school, I probably saw one actual fight, and it lasted about 3 seconds.
I saw, not too many, but a few, but based on, like, my uncles who grew up on a farm, they got into fist fights with each other relentlessly.
Right.
And they grew up in, like, the 50s and 60s.
I think maybe we've stopped just, like, letting children duke it out.
Yeah, maybe.
So
Children should fight more.
Yeah. that's the message of this podcast.
Let kids fist fight.
Let kids punch each other. So yeah, Jews were definitely not allowed everywhere, and often it's these kind of unwritten rules, right? Where people sort of knew that they would not feel welcome at certain places. So there were some tourist cabins that allowed Jews, others didn't. Some tried primarily to allow Jews.
Okay.
So, kind of keeping that community. They also were generally not welcomed at the aquatic center. Also at one of the arcades, which is interesting. So there's two.
Just one of the arcades?
Well, so there's 2 arcades in Winnipeg Beach, and apparently one of them was kind of more welcoming to Jewish people than the other.
I guess just based on the owner's
Just
preferences?
based on the owners. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's a reality of anyone who's kind of a minority in that way, is you, like, become familiar with, like, where you are and aren't welcome, which sucks. In 1963, a man also drove through Winnipeg Beach with signs and a loudspeaker making anti-Semitic remarks. And
also very gross. All
when
right.
he was stopped by the police, tried to claim that he was advertising for a dance.
What kind of dance would that be?
I don't know. Not a good one. I don't want to go to that dance.
It doesn't sound fun.
No, and there's, like, definitely efforts also to, like, keep Winnipeg Beach English. Like, if you look at photos, often there's, like, Union Jacks strung up in cabins and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the beach itself was open to everyone. And CPR kind of ensured that by being, whatever, a capitalistic thing, right? Capitalism did good in this case. The other really interesting thing at Winnipeg Beach is how they kind of kept the peace.
Okay.
So, like I said, there were fist fights and stuff. Yeah. And because Winnipeg Beach was outside the city, it was regulated differently. So, from reading histories, it seems like at any given point there was, like, one police officer, like the Winnipeg Beach police officer.
Just managing, like, up to 30,000 people?
Yeah, it seems like it. I mean, I'm sure later on there were more, but in these early days. So, the police presence was pretty minimal. And what's especially interesting is how this plays out during Prohibition.
Oh.
Because it wasn't even the police who were in charge of enforcing Prohibition. It was the Provincial Morality Squad.
Yeah, okay.
They were in charge of these liquor laws, and so in order to enforce those, they would have to travel out to the beach, which is, whatever, ultimately like 3 hours out of their day, right, if they're commuting there and back. And so they weren't out there all the time. And so lots of people in the community were bootlegging. Often it was like husband and wife teams.
Yeah, keep your marriage strong.
Yeah. Similarly, Sunday closures were often flouted.
Okay, yeah.
This is a thing that I feel like is a little different in Manitoba than other places. We had Sunday closures until pretty recently.
Yeah, do you know when that stopped?
I
don't think it's not really relevant, but...
Even when I was a kid, I feel like a lot of places, if not most places, were closed on Sundays. And even now, hours are pretty restrictive. They
Yeah.
loosened up a couple years ago.
Yeah.
So I think you can open at 10 instead of noon on Sunday or something like that.
And then you're only open till 6.
Yeah. But yeah, at the beach, that was often floated, which kind of makes sense, right? People are mainly out
There's
there
no
on the
laws at the
weekends.
beach.
There's no laws at the beach. That's right. That's what we say about the beach. But like, that's when you get the most business, right?
Yeah.
Like, if I'm an arcade, I don't want to be closed on one of the 2 days that most
Yeah.
people are out there. But apparently, occasionally the RCMP would kind of come through and fine businesses, and often it would be like leaked that like, oh, the RCMP is coming, or oh, the Provincial Morality Squad is coming, like shut down the bootleg, shut down the arcade.
Yeah, okay.
Apparently, the RCMP once broke apart a pinball machine to prove their point that they could not be open on Sunday, which I feel like is not an official manner of enforcing laws.
No, that seems like a guy just got angry and broke
I
a
think
pinball
so.
machine.
Yeah. But like, that seems to be generally how things were dealt with at Winnipeg Beach, like less than officially.
Yeah.
And that attitude toward working on Sundays definitely changes over time, becomes much more acceptable. In 1905, apparently cabin owners were criticized even just for doing manual labor on Sundays,
Oh, wow.
like building their cabins. And so people get a lot looser about that. So because there weren't a ton of police, the RCMP only came through occasionally, lifeguards often took it upon themselves to kind of keep the peace of the beach. There's a couple of really interesting histories, like from lifeguards, especially in and around the dance hall, because there's a ton
I
of people
bet.
there, and the dance hall, for whatever reason, didn't have security.
Oh,
I don't know why, but so often the
there's just
lifeguards...
no laws anywhere. in
No, there's
Winnipeg.
no laws in Winnipeg Beach, apparently. And
Except
so...
for the one about being half dressed on Main Street.
Yeah, if you're doing that, the police will take you off. The one police officer will come and remove you. But, like, go ahead and bootleg and, you know, mix up your bathtub gin, and that's fine. Surprisingly, I didn't read a ton of, like, Winnipeg Beach crime stories.
Oh, yeah, that is interesting.
There were a couple, but, yeah, not a ton. And I guess, you know, the police would come out when they had to. The one kind of big crime anecdote is about the so-called Dewdrop Gang.
That's a very scary name.
The Dewdrop Gang were a gang mainly based in the North End of Winnipeg. And they seem to be, it's unclear what they actually did that people didn't like. They were kind of just like ruffians.
Yeah.
Right? Like
Based on the name, I assume they're a group of, like, scraggly 10-year-olds.
I think that's it. They like walk around kind of like basically like starting fights.
Yeah.
It sounds like they maybe were responsible for a couple of burglaries at some point, but that's
Okay.
basically the extent of it. It seems like mainly they were walking kind of like being tough guys and like annoying people. So
The Dewdrop Gang as
Yeah.
their name, which is the
very-
toughest name.
Yeah. Very tough. Yeah, I think primarily they were just disruptive.
Yeah.
And so apparently they came out to Winnipeg Beach one summer and were being disruptive and causing fights on the boardwalk. And so some off-duty RCMP, a local group of brothers, and some lifeguards decided that they were going to go to the dance hall when the Dewdrop Gang were there, tell them that one of their members was outside in trouble, and then when they came outside the dance hall, they beat them up.
I don't think that's a thing cops can do.
It says that the way this is told is, once outside the hall, the gang members encountered much resistance, and after that particular night, never returned to Winnipeg Beach.
Yeah, I wouldn't return either if someone tricked me and beat me up.
I wouldn't either. I don't blame them, but I guess it worked. Please don't enforce laws like that. That's not a good idea. Oh,
Let the
jeez.
Dewdrop Gang be.
Yeah. There's another super interesting story about a guy by the name of George Smith and his friends who walked down the boardwalk in drag one night
Oh.
and ended up having stones thrown at them. So again, it seems like there aren't authorities on either side of that to prevent that happening. And like, this is, you know, I can't remember the exact year, but this is for sure between the 20s and the 40s
Yeah.
that happened. So like, pretty brave,
Yeah.
honestly. And so what happened was that an owner of a business let them come in and then go out through the back.
Oh, okay. So some sympathy from someone.
Yes. But it seems like people were largely just like solving their own issues in this way.
Do you know why they went down the beach in drag in the first place?
I don't.
Just for kicks? Or
Just
like,
for
was
kicks,
it
I guess. I don't know. Just
I mean, all right.
just for fun. I don't know. Yeah, it's a good question. There was another story about a short guy who was teased because his date was over 6 feet tall. And he was a jockey, apparently.
Oh.
And he was teased until he jumped on a table and bit someone.
This does seem like the Wild West of beaches.
It does. So, like, you know what? I'm getting more sympathy towards the Victoria Beach people who are like, maybe I don't go there.
Someone bit someone last week. Like, maybe we just don't go out this weekend.
Yeah. And so, like, often what's policing what's going on down there, and especially people for, like, living at the beach, is, like, social networks policed what the police usually did. So, like, store owners and managers who were often women kind of acted as, like, surrogate mothers.
Okay.
To their young employees. So they were often kind of telling them, like, okay, yes, you can go out tonight, or no, you can't, or be home by this time, you know?
Yeah.
And it was similar at rooming houses. So a lot of rooming houses were run by women, and landladies kind of policed the morality of the people who were staying there in that way. So it continued to be a pretty popular spot for dating and mingling and doing all that kind of stuff. Until I'd say about, like, the 50s or 60s.
Okay.
So by the 40s, there are still, like, thousands of people taking trains, but by the 50s, most people are coming by car. So there had been a road since 1915, but cars at that point were largely for, like, millionaires, right?
Yeah.
And so by the 50s, it's a lot more common to have a car. And in the 60s, train service was actually stopped.
Okay.
So that's a big part of it, because train service is what made the beach accessible, right? Like, for me, for instance, I don't drive. And so if I want to go to the beach, I have to find someone else to take me to the beach, right? And I think it's same with a lot of kind of working class folk.
Yeah.
That also meant that it was an adjustment more to families rather than young people who were going out, right? Because families tend to have cars, not so much like teenagers, despite, like, what Greece would have you believe.
Yeah.
There's also, like, this kind of general moral panic about, like, juvenile delinquency after World War II, for whatever reason. This is, like, the time of the teenager, right? In the kind of 40s and 50s. And people were worried that because most of the boarding houses were gone, it was just kind of like these old cabins who had kind of gone into disrepair, that there wasn't really a place where young people could go stay where they were, like, policed, right? You'd go to a cabin where there wasn't a landlady looking over your shoulder and saying, no, you can't bring that person back here, or no, you can't come home at 2 a.m. Apparently, Stephen Juba expressed concern that these cottages were being rented out to juvenile delinquents for wild weekend parties.
All right.
Yeah.
Stephen Juba was Winnipeg's longest serving mayor, just in case you don't know the name.
Yes, and a man with many large opinions.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Just had a lot of thoughts.
Yeah.
And they actually ended up creating a curfew for youth under 16 after 10 p.m.
Oh.
So if this was, like, the hot spot for dating for teenagers, and the ride's only open at 6 p.m., it's, like, not that fun to go out anymore, right?
Yeah.
You gotta be back at home by 10 p.m. What fun is that? And they really started advertising to families instead.
Okay.
The amusement area was unfortunately kind of left to deteriorate. And in 1967, it was knocked down entirely.
Okay.
So the roller coaster, which, I mean, to be honest, by 1967, I would not
was
want to
not
ride.
safe.
No, I would not want to ride that roller coaster, but, like, it's still sad. So it's knocked down, and I do feel like even when I go to Winnipeg Beach now, it does kind of have that feel of, like, oh, this place was happening, like, 80 years ago.
A while ago, yeah.
Right? Like, this seems like it was a cool place.
Yeah.
I mean, all of Winnipeg, to some extent, has that feel.
Yeah. One of the arcades is still there.
Yeah, I think there may actually still be 2. I don't know. I don't know offhand, though, if they're the original 2 arcades.
I've been exactly once, so I'm not an expert.
Okay. Yeah, I've been to Winnipeg Beach several times. I mean, it's a lovely place to go, but these days, I mean, all there is to do is swim, essentially. It's kind of, in some ways, it's kind of gone back to what it was in, like, the late 1800s.
Yeah, it's kind of gone full circle.
Yeah.
In a sense.
I mean, not that I don't think anyone's going out to Winnipeg Beach to be like, oh, I'm taking in the fresh air and the mineral water. But
No, it's not quite a nature retreat
no,
these
it's not
days.
quite a nature retreat, but it's also not like a big like amusement zone.
Yeah.
It's just like go in the water,
It's a
paddle
beach.
around a bit. It's a beach.
Yeah.
Kind of one of many, but I think back then it was, one of a kind.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's Winnipeg Beach. Hopefully this summer things are less weird and we can go to beaches and be with people.
Go enjoy some semblance of nature.
That would be lovely. I mean, nature is allowed right now,
Yeah.
but nature with other people,
Not so much.
not so much. I just wanted to do one quick note on sources, which I don't usually do, but for this episode, I relied very heavily on the book Winnipeg Beach by Dale Barber. If you want to learn more about this and you want more of like an academic-y take on it, you want more details and you want to learn about how Winnipeg Beach was like a discursive space and fancy things that I'm not going to talk about, that's the place to go. I'll put it in the source notes. So thank you everyone so much for listening to this episode. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
We are One Great History on Facebook and Instagram, and on Twitter we're the #1 Great History.
One day I'll learn our handles.
It's fine. And you can also check out our website at onegreathistory.wordpress.com to see pictures and sources from this week's episode.
All right, thank you so much for listening.